In its 1830-31 session, the North Carolina General Assembly strengthened its 1818 law that prohibited anyone teaching a slave to read and write. When slavery ended, most blacks in the South could not read and write. In fact, the general populace in the South, white and black, was illiterate. Before the Civil War, there was not a system of free public education in North Carolina. Only those who were white and some free blacks who could afford home tutors or private schools were literate. In 1868, the North Carolina legislature created a system of free public education for all its citizens, whites and blacks. According to the state's newly installed Assistant Superintendent of Public Instruction, in 1868, all North Carolina counties east of the Blue Ridge must have at least one school for blacks. Rutherford County was east of the Blue Ridge and thus had at least one school for blacks. Assistant Superintendent James Walker Hood was an African American charged in the late 1860s with overseeing the public education of the state's black population. The earliest schools for blacks in post-Civil War North Carolina and in the South were brush arbors. These were simple structures that functioned both as a school and a place for religious worship. In fact, the close association between black schools and black churches had its beginning in these brush arbors. The association has lasted since then. For more than a decade after the 1860s, the curriculum in black schools was very basic: reading, writing, and arithmetic. The early schools were ungraded, which means that children and adults of all ages learned the same thing in the same one-room space. Teachers in these early schools were mainly whites, and relatively few were black. By the mid-1870s, missionaries, mainly from the North, constructed numerous schools for blacks throughout North Carolina and the South. Once a school was established and teachers hired, the Missionary Society turned the operation of the school over to the state and under the auspices of the Freedmen Bureau. The Federal Freedmen Bureau also built a few schools for blacks. Whether built by the Freedmen Bureau or by missionaries, many black public schools became known as Freedmen's Schools, a name that lasted well past 1900. By the early 1880s, several black communities had begun their own schools, many of which were operated by a local church and within the church. This was especially the case in rural areas. In areas with large black populations, the communities began to construct school buildings separate from the church buildings. In Rutherford County, the practice of black communities building their own school buildings lasted until the 1940s. Oral accounts indicate that by the 1880s, most teachers in the county's black schools were black, men, and women. No information is available at this time about specific schools for blacks that existed in Rutherford County before about 1880. Census records for 1870, the first time that most blacks were included in the federal census, indicate that a large segment of the black population could read and write.
I don't know when or where my parents, Hannah and Jeff Alexander, learned to read and write, but they could. Both were born during slavery and both were dedicated to education, especially my mother. A year or so after I was born, my parents provided the land on which to build a school in Doggett Grove. It was a one-room log school across from the church. It was named Dogwood Grove School, but most folks later called it Doggett Grove School. I went to that school, and so did my oldest children. I am Kip Arrowood, speaking for Vardry Lewis Alexander, 1890 to 1956.
In 1879, Rutherford County established a Board of Education. 106 schools came under the board's supervision. 25 of these schools were African American. Some of the county's schools remained outside the board's supervision, especially private schools, black ones and white ones. Though the Board of Education assumed supervision over the 25 African American schools, the support that the board provided these schools was minimal. Though conditions improved slightly over the decades, underfunding black schools in comparison to white schools lasted until desegregation. From 1879 until 1951, the Board of Education did not build any schools for African Americans, perhaps with one exception. The equipment and the supplies the board provided African American schools were inadequate. Often, they were discards from the white schools.
In 1935, I graduated from Morehouse College in Atlanta. The same year, I secured a teaching and principal position in Rutherford County at Doggett Grove School. The school did not have a library. The textbooks the board sent to school were so worn and raggedy that we could not use them. I convinced the superintendent to give the school adequate textbooks. My name is Ulysses Miller, and I'm speaking for Thomas Kilgore, 1913 to 1998.
Most African American public schools before World War I remained underfunded, one-room wooden structures. The vast majority did not have more than 6 or 7 grades. Teachers in these schools were mainly blacks, mainly women, but some men. Some of these teachers had received only an elementary education. They usually taught the lower grades. Some received a high school education at Lincoln Academy in Kings Mountain. Others, an education at Western Union Academy outside Rutherford, which later was incorporated as Spindale. Others still were educated at the high school division of a historically black college or university. A few had attended or had graduated from a teacher's college, at the time called a normal college. 2 of these teachers in these schools were sisters, Lily Bell Bright and Texas Bright Logan. Over the years, the Bright sisters and other members of the Bright family taught at different black schools in the county. By 1907, at least 2 private black schools had opened in the county: Western Union Academy in what later became Spindale, and Mary B. Mullins School for Colored Youth in Ayer, which became URE and later Lake Lure. Both schools eventually installed a high school division. Western Union Academy in particular installed a teacher training program and provided teachers for Rutherford County, Western North Carolina, and other areas in the South. Before the mid-1920s, blacks could not receive a public high school education within Rutherford County. Many, such as Laura Una Miller Wilkins and Elizabeth Raython Duffy, received a private high school education at Western Union Academy. The 1920s brought significant changes to public black education in Rutherford County and neighboring Polk County. One of the most significant of these changes was the building of Rosenwald Schools. About 1913, Julius Rosenwald, a philanthropist and CEO of Sears Roebuck in Chicago, collaborated with Booker T. Washington, president of Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. Their plan was to improve the quality of black education in Alabama. The program was successful. A few years later, Rosenwald established his own program to help black communities build schools. Before Rosenwald's death in 1932, the Rosenwald Fund, said to have helped build thousands of schools in 15 southern and border states. A few of these schools were for poor whites and for Native Americans, but the vast majority were for blacks, about 5,000 in 15 states, 800 in North Carolina, at least 3 in Rutherford County, and 5 in Polk County. Around 1921, the Rosenwald Fund helped build New Hope School in Rutherford, replacing an existing school. This new New Hope School had 6 rooms and 6 teachers, and eventually installed a high school division. In 1924, a Rosenwald one-room school opened in Bostic. In the 1925-26 academic year, a Rosenwald 4-room, 4-teacher elementary school opened in Forest City. The school first was known as the Grahamtown Colored Elementary School. Later, a high school building and a vocational building were constructed on the campus. Grahamtown School became the first black public school to offer students in the lower part of the county a high school education. Like New Hope, high school at first meant 8th or 9th grade. Then grade 10 was added. By the late 1940s, the 11th grade was added to both New Hope and Grahamtown. Both schools had greatly improved facilities, including a kitchen. The Rosenwald Fund helped build elementary schools in Polk County, including eastern Polk County. The fund also helped build elementary schools in upper Spartanburg County in South Carolina. Some students from Brooklyn School in Chesnee and the community known as Little Africa attended high school in Rutherford County. In addition to New Hope and Grahamtown, in the 1920s and 1930s, a few other schools upgraded to 2 or more rooms and teachers. Some black communities in the county increased in population, which required larger schools. By the 1930s, Doggett Grove School had 3 rooms and 7 grades. Union Mills School had 4 rooms and 7 grades. Most black schools in the county had no more than 7 grades. For the 8th grade and higher, students had to attend either New Hope School or Grahamtown School. As late as the mid-1930s, a few black schools still operated in a local black church.
I attended Haynes Grove School in Cliffside. It was in Haynes Grove Church. They drew a curtain across the sanctuary to separate the lower grades from the higher grades. For high school, I went to Grahamtown. I am Laura Logan Freeman, Carver High School class of 1963, speaking for Ruth Wilkins Camp, 1926 to 2006.
I became a teacher and principal at Doggett Grove School in 1935, replacing Professor Dougherty. In 1936, I gave the dedication speech at the new brick Haynes Grove School in Cliffside. This was the first brick school for blacks in the county. Mr. Odell Hamrick and others built the school building. Mr. Hamrick was a brick mason and at one time a teacher at the school. My name is Ulysses Miller, speaking for Thomas Gilgore, 1913-1998.
I went to school in Henrietta, located between Zion Hill Church and New Zion Church. It was one big room, sometimes divided into 2 rooms. During the Depression, a lot of children were underweight. Miss Adeline Petty and some other women from the community opened a kitchen in the basement, brought food, and cooked lunch for the children. I'm Sarah Dawkins Finney, speaking for Dorothy Braces Surratt, 1929-2012.
Buses for black students came in 1937, about a decade after they were made available to white students.
My father became principal at Union Mills School in 1933. Before we had school buses, some students walked several miles to school. Others rode on the back of trucks to get there. My name is Lavella Meacham Harden, born 1931.
My name is Lalaj Wilkins Abrams. I was born in 1924. My father, Eckes Wilkins, and Boston McKinney went to the county seat and applied for a bus to bus us from Harris to Douglas Grove, and from Douglas Grove Elementary School to Grahamtown High School.
I went to school in Bostic. The books were so bad they fell apart when you opened them. We only had 4 grades. We rode the bus to Grahamtown after the 4th grade. My name is Jatarius Lipscomb, speaking for Johnny Logan.
Western Union Academy, a private school, operated this high school until the school closed, probably in the mid or late 1930s. The Mary B. Mullins School, another private school, maintained this high school until 1953, when the campus closed. Once a public high school education became available to blacks in the county, several adults who had finished the highest elementary grades available to them went back to school. New Hope, Union Mills, and Grahamtown held high school classes at night. Milton Robinson, who had attended elementary school in Henrietta, enrolled in the evening high school at Grahamtown and was a member of the class of 1944. 2 years after he graduated, he founded the county's first and only black newspaper. Both Grahamtown and New Hope's high schools drew students across county and state lines. Even after Carver High School in Spindale opened in 1951, it accommodated students from eastern Polk County, where there was not a high school for blacks.
After the Rosenwald New Hope School burned in the 1930s, they built a new one, a brick one. I went to the new New Hope. We had hand-me-down desks and hand-me-down books, few and poor supplies for learning. When I went to Carver High in 1959, we had the same thing. Broken and not enough typewriters for the business classes, and practically no equipment for the science classes. The boys in shop had little to work with. My name is Joanne Whiteside Green, Carver High School class of 1963.
I first attended Ponderville School on Pea Ridge Road in eastern Polk County in the late 40s. Then I went to Rosenwald School in Union Grove. The physical conditions were poor at best. And then to Cobb Elementary, which Polk County built in 1951. We had old, used textbooks. For high school, we had to ride the bus from Polk County to Carver in Rutherford County. There was not a high school for blacks in eastern Polk County. My name is Jenny Twitty Smith, Carver High School class of 1961.
The Rosenwald School at Brooklyn in Chesney, South Carolina, had closed before I was of school age. I went to Brown's Chapel School in Chesney and then to Carver High in Spartanburg. There wasn't a high school for blacks in Upper Spartanburg County. Some students from Chesney attended Grahamtown High and some went to New Hope and some to Shelby. Some commuted and some lived with relatives in Forest City. I'm Sarah Dawkins Finney. I attended Carver High School in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and also Claflin College in Orangeburg, South Carolina.
My elementary school was Union Mills Colored Elementary School. I had a job making 75 cents a week, starting the fires in the pot-belly stoves. All black schools back then had pot-belly stoves. We didn't have central heat or central air or much of anything back then. The school was not like the white school. My name is Ulysses Miller, speaking for Dennis Forney, Carver High School, class of 1962.
Black schools in Rutherford County were always inferior in physical plant and equipment and supplies before the schools integrated. In Rutherford County and other areas of the South, the impending landmark Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision of 1954 prompted school boards in the late 1940s to begin to improve the facilities of black schools. No doubt, this was a move to try to avoid school desegregation. Rutherford County's response to the impending decision was to close numerous black public elementary schools in the county, then to consolidate them into 2 elementary schools. One was newly constructed in Forest City, and the other was renovated in New Hope. The board also provided more buses for the students. New Hope in Rutherfordton and Dunbar in Forest City opened in 1951. In the same year, the county opened a newly built high school for all black students, Carver High School in Spindale. The 3 new school facilities were greatly improved over former facilities, but still were not equal to the county's white schools, neither in physical facility nor in equipment and supplies provided. For example, Carver had athletic teams, but the school never had an athletic field for its teams. Science and vocational programs lacked standard equipment. Textbooks and other teaching materials remained less than adequate. Despite the less than adequate improvement boards of educations made to black schools in the South, the Supreme Court in 1954 declared separate schools for blacks and whites inherently unequal. The court mandated that public schools should desegregate with all deliberate speed. Rutherford County took 14 years after 1954 before it began to desegregate its schools. Consequently, largely because its facilities were not up to par as a high school for white students, Carver was closed. Most black teachers lost their jobs or chose to leave the county. What we know as the all-black public high school appeared and disappeared in one generation in Rutherford County and throughout the South. Every 2 years, former students of Carver High School meet for a reunion. In not too many years, this too will disappear.